After 9 games of the World Chess Championship, Magnus Carlsen was still enjoying a slender lead. He just needed to get through 3 games to retain his world title. Today, Viswanathan Anand, the challenger, had the white pieces. Now he really had to take his chance to play for a win, and he played d4 as he's been doing throughout this match. And Carlsen shows a very interesting opening. He played the really sharp Grunfeld. I mean, so far in this match he's played fairly solidly with black against d4, but the Grunfeld, offers both sides chances and really gives white, very interesting chances to go for a win. So I think quite a brave and bold decision to play the Grunfeld by Carlsen. After 15 moves, typical position has arisen. Very often in the Grunfeld, white gets this passed d-pawn. But as kind of compensation, black has fantastic play with his pieces. Very active bishops. Anand played queen c1. Now this is a multi-purpose move. First of all, the queen and the bishop attack the pawn on h6. The queen also defends that pawn on b2. So those are kind of the obvious things. But also, retreating the queen opens up this diagonal. So very often this bishop can slam down on b5 and cause some kind of problem for the rook. Now if Carlsen were to defend that pawn on h6 with the king, then the pawn would advance. And this is a tricky position for black. Of course, the queen could blockade that pawn, but the queen is your strongest piece. Do you really want to be able to have to blockade a mere pawn with the queen? So instead of playing the obvious move here, king h7, Carlsen chose queen f6. Very interesting. And now if white advances the pawn, then the rook attacks, and you can see this is a far more active way for black to play the position. So instead Anand took the pawn on h6, and Carlsen re-established material parity by taking the pawn down on b2. Anand exchanged and played knight g5. And after the game, Carlsen said he had underestimated this continuation. It's a very interesting move. I mean, first of all, it's possible that white can snap off this bishop on e4, so that's already something. Well, if the bishop retreats, then the bishop on e2 is attacked. Now, it could go to f3, it might go to b5, and then the d-pawn starts to advance, and this is quite dangerous. That d-pawn really starts to look very threatening indeed. So instead, Carlsen, after half an hour's thought, played the bishop into d4. Now, it's a great square for the bishop, supported by the pawn, and of course it cuts off the rook's support for this d-pawn. Now, Anand has a couple of very interesting continuations. He decided to take the bishop. Why not? Grabbing the 2 bishops, not a bad idea. He could also have played bishop b5. A very interesting move, because if the rook moves, then white will gain time. Then you snap off the bishop and start pushing the d-pawn. Very interesting. Black's best is probably to take on d5 and offer an exchange sacrifice. But after this move, rook e1, well, black has to avoid a rook exchange. And, well, this is an interesting position for white to play. It's very double-edged. But Anand decided just to take that bishop. It's also strong. And then play bishop f3, hitting the rook. The rook has to go back. So white has the two bishops, and now Anand advanced the pawn. The rook goes in front of the pawn, and Anand protected that pawn. So those bishops look pretty powerful, but black's bishop, defended by the pawn, cuts off the support from the rook. That's very important. Now, this knight is really a poor piece sitting on a6, so Carlsen brought it back into play with knight b4. Sometimes that knight can take on a2, sometimes it's just coming back to c6. Anand played rook d2. It would have been bolder to seize control of the open e file. And black is not yet out of the woods in that position. Carlsen said after the game that was the move he was most worried about. Instead, rook d2 played by Anand, protecting the pawn, but it buys, black has bought himself time. Rook e8. After this move, controlling, well, the only open file in the position, Carlsen said he really wasn't too worried anymore. Rook c1. It's actually hard for white to make so much progress in this position. Now, what Carlsen would like to do is basically exchange bishops with bishop e5 and round up this d pawn. Then really the danger is past. But if you play bishop e5 immediately, then rook e1 is a good move. So there's a pin. Bishop takes bishop. Obviously rook takes rook check. So f6 has to be played, and then bishop g4. Now black can no longer play f5 because of this bishop here. It could be taken. The rook has to go back, and then d7. And you can see that advanced d pawn is creating enormous problems for black. So to prepare bishop e5, Carlsen played rook e6, and now you can see that that rook is defended by the pawn. And after this move h4, well, if white had time to play h5 and exchange pawns on bishop g4, that would be pretty good. But Carlsen gets in time with bishop e5, and you can see that rook e1 just isn't possible here because the rook is protected by the pawn. So after bishop e5, well, the bishops have to be exchanged, and now black threatens to play knight round to c6 and into d4. I mean, that the knight could still be taken by the bishop, but still, the rook and pawn ending, well, is just not a problem for black there. So Vichy decided to head straight for a draw with bishop takes pawn. It's interesting, when Vichy decides time to go for a draw, he doesn't mess about. Bishop takes pawn, and now we have a fourth sequence. Black has to take the bishop, d7 threatening queen, the knight has to come back, Vichy makes a queen, that gets taken, rook takes knight check, and they have a rook and pawn ending with equal pawns. And, well, this is a very dry position. It's going to be a draw very, very easily and very soon. So Vichy just offered a draw here, and Carlsen took it. No big surprise. So, quite an intriguing game, actually. I think, first of all, a bold decision by Carlsen to play the Grunfeld. Afterwards, Carlsen was asked, well, did your preparation or your training with Kasparov several years ago help you with playing the Grunfeld? Because of course Kasparov is a great exponent of the Grunfeld. Well, interestingly, Carlsen didn't deny it. He just said, well, when we trained together in 2009, 2010, we did look at the Grunfeld. He didn't go any further than that. But Anand certainly had a little bit of an advantage out of the opening, but Carlsen defended pretty well. So, 2 games still to play. Carlsen still leads. Tomorrow, Saturday, is a rest day in Sochi. They play the 11th game on Sunday. Then there'll be a rest day on Monday, and the 12th game will be played on Tuesday. Do join me for my reports after those games.